Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 10. I'm always intended for half PPR leagues on this channel, but we're going to start off with the quarterbacks who are unranked this week. We have Dak Prescott out with a hamstring injury and might be out for the year. We'll find out soon enough. And Trevor Lawrence also not going to play this week, not trending in the right direction. So looks like we're getting Cooper Rush and Mac Jones filling in for them, but we're also getting Will Levis back from injury. He will start. There's no Mason Rudolph in Tennessee this week, but there's also 4 teams on bye. Jordan Love, Geno Smith, Gardner Minshew, and Jameis Winston are unranked in this video. Let's get going with number 1, who I did tell you to start on Thursday. Lamar Jackson was my QB1, and he threw for 290 yards, 4 touchdowns, also ran for 33. He was an obvious pick for number 1. Number 2, I have Jalen Hurts at Dallas, who's actually been the quarterback number 1 over the last 4 games. Jalen Hurts is giving you 27.4 points per game on 211 passing yards, but 40 rushing yards, with 6 passing touchdowns, 6 rushing touchdowns, and not a single turnover in that stretch. So that and the rushing touchdowns are a big reason why he's been so good. So he's a stud. He gets a top 10 matchup against Dallas, where historically he does average 18.9 points against them. In his last 5 games, he only has 7 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, but about 40 rushing yards per game, which is what he's giving you this season. So he'll continue. He'll be fine. I'm definitely trusting Jalen Hurts at the top of the ranks. I'm also keeping Josh Allen in my lineup. At number 3, it's an obvious start. On the road at the Colts, should be a high-scoring game. I think their offense will play well, and Allen is the quarterback 4 over the last 4 games. Although he's not running it as much, only 13 rushing yards, he only has 2 turnovers this season, and with 10 total touchdowns the last 4 games, you always trust him. He'll be fine. No one's benching Josh Allen. At number 4 is where I ranked Joe Burrow entering Thursday night. He might be the quarterback 1 this week. That wouldn't shock me with 428 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's usually enough to get it done, and he did that without T. Higgins. This Ravens matchup is terrible, and Burrow and Jamar Chase are an elite combo. Number 5, I think Brock Purdy will have a dominant game this week. He gets the best matchup on paper. The Bucks give up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 5 games, an average of 27.3 points per game. 320 passing yards per game, 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Purdy's going to dominate in this matchup. The only way it doesn't work out is if somehow Christian McCaffrey scores every single touchdown on the ground. But I think Purdy could legitimately throw for 304 touchdowns. Odds are one of those touchdowns goes to Christian McCaffrey in the passing game. So I'm definitely starting Purdy. I think he's a lock in your lineup this week. And he is the quarterback 6 over his last 4 games. He is giving you 20.1 points per game, thanks to 34 rushing yards on top of 243 passing yards. So really good floor for Purdy. His legs have really stepped up the contributions this season. Number 6, I'm going with Jared Goff at Houston, who I think gets back to his hot streak. Last week in the rain was the main reason why he wasn't too good. I think they would have dropped 30 if not for the rain in Green Bay. So in a dome in Houston, he gets back on track here. I think the Texans defense is far easier against the pass than the run. So especially in the red zone, I think Goff will be chucking it. The Houston defense have allowed 11 passing touchdowns over the last 5 games, and 3 of those games include 3 touchdown passes. We saw that happen last week with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. So I do think Goff will pay off. I think he throws at least 2 touchdowns, maybe 3 plus. And after that rainy game in division, they get a primetime spot here, Sunday Night Football. I trust Goff. He's a top 6 play in Week 10. Number 7, I have Baker Mayfield versus San Francisco, who you would think might lose some value with Mike Evans and Godwin not on the field, but he's still been fantastic. His last 4 games, averaging 22.8 points per game, over 300 passing yards per game, 21 rushing yards per game, and with 12 touchdowns, 7 turnovers, he is the quarterback 3 during that span. Baker just can't be stopped. So he's making a case for MVP this season, although they are losing a little bit more lately. He's been fantastic. I'm very impressed with Baker. So that's why I cannot bench him. I think he's still a top 10 play. At number 7, I don't know if he's fantastic. The Niners are a bottom 10 matchup, but this game is probably a massive blowout win by the Niners. I think they're going to drop well over 40 points, and at some point, their defense will let up, take their foot off the gas, and Baker should put up some points in garbage time. So there's going to be catch-up mode. I do think Baker will be fine, and Cade Otton, Rachaad White probably catch some touchdown passes. Baker will be fine. So he's still top 10 at number 7. I still think he's a good start. Last week was one of his worst games of the season, and he still put up 18 points. Definitely trust Baker in your lineup. Number 8, I have Jayden Daniels versus Pittsburgh, and the matchup does scare me. The Steelers off a bye. Not a very good spot. They are the number 28 matchup, so bottom 5, only giving up 13.9 points per game, only 6 touchdowns, 6 interceptions over the last 5 weeks. So I do worry about Daniels a little bit in this spot, but Terry McLaurin should definitely pay off. In general, I do expect Daniels to be fine thanks to Terry in the passing game. His rushing stats are also going to keep him viable every week. He's averaging 40 rushing yards per game over the last month, and although he is nursing that rib injury, it still keeps his floor very high. He's giving you 17.1 points per game, but that is not great. It only ranks his quarterback 14 on a per game basis. So with no turnovers, you definitely can't panic, but Jayden Daniels in a tough spot I don't think will be his best on the season. This matchup is a downgrade, and I think at number 8, you should pump the brakes a little bit. But I'm still starting him. I'm not going to bench Jayden Daniels. I'm not going to overreact to just one bad matchup. So they might be looking ahead to the Thursday game, but I still think they compete on offense. Jayden Daniels should be fine. I'm still starting him in my lineup. Number 9, I have Kyler Murray versus the Jets, who's actually been really bad for fantasy the last 4 games, only averaging 14.8 points per game, 205 passing yards, 26 rushing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, and 3 turnovers. That's only quarterback 20 in points per game. So really nothing special lately, but they've been winning. It's their first 3-game win streak in over 3 years. And if it's not broke, why fix it? So not quite sure Kyler will get going and back on track, but this matchup is actually top 12. The Jets secondary isn't that scary. Only 1 interception over the last 5 games. Although they only give up 206 passing yards in that span, they also allow 30 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. I think that's where Kyler will capitalize. So although he probably doesn't throw for over 250 and definitely not 3 touchdowns in this game, I could see 40 plus rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. If that happens, you're going to be very, very happy with Kyler, and odds are they keep this game pretty high scoring. I do trust their offense in general, and at some point he will bounce back. His talent on the ground always keeps him as a decent option, but the last 4 games, he has not been very good on average. So a little bit worried about it, but I still think I'm trusting Kyler. I'll roll him out there one more week, but if he sucks again, maybe I'll lose faith. Number 10, I have Sam Darnold at Jacksonville, who gets a elite matchup here. The Jags ranked top 2, giving up 24.6 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So Darnold should get a big upgrade here. The Jags allow 273 yards per game, 12 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions, and also 37 rushing yards per game. Darnold is underrated when it comes to his mobility, but he has not been doing it very much this season. Only 18 rushing yards in his last 4 games on a per game basis. That's not great. So I don't trust him too much. He's kind of relying on the touchdowns. His yardage is nothing special. In his last 4 games, he's only the quarterback 23 on a per game basis. 14.4 is not great. But just like Kyler, I don't know if I'm just going to completely overreact to that number. I think he'll be good in a good matchup. I do trust him to play well. So I see a lot of checkdowns for Aaron Jones here. Jefferson will not be stopped. And TJ Hockenson, I think, will find the end zone. I think Darnold is a good play this week because the Jags matchup is just so good. So I will trust that. I do worry about Darnold a little bit. I think it's a big tier drop off from Kyler to Darnold. But at number 10, I do think he's worth a start. In week 10, I would plug him in. Number 11, I have Justin Herbert versus Tennessee, who I want to rank higher, honestly. He's been great the last 4 games. He is the quarterback 9 in that span, averaging 18 points per game, thanks to his passing yards and not a single turnover in this sample size. 287 yards, 15 on the ground, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers at all. So if he keeps it clean, the floor is very safe, and this matchup against the Titans doesn't scare me at all. So I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be a safe floor play. I don't know if he's top 10 every week, but I do trust the floor. His yardage has really stepped up. Their receiving core also getting a lot healthier as of late. So I do trust Herbert. I think he's a fine play. If you're looking for a bye week fill-in, he is top 12 in my opinion this week. At number 12, I have Patrick Mahomes versus Denver, who's been the quarterback 13 in points per game the last month. He has been a little better, but not elite. Not the player you drafted, not what you expected. You are disappointed with Mahomes, who is averaging 17.1 points the last 4 weeks. That's fine, but with 4 turnovers, you're not happy with that lack of production. So nothing special from him, although Hopkins does give you a bit more confidence. Kelce has stepped up lately. I still don't think Mahomes is an elite option in fantasy. So not ready to fully trust him at number 12. You don't have to start him, but he is 12-1 in his career against the Broncos, and his only loss was the last game in this history. So it was last year. I'm sure they bounce back. I do think they win, but he doesn't need to play lights out in order to do that. If you look at his last 5 games versus Denver, he's averaging 18.2 points per game, just under 300 yards per game, but 9 touchdowns, 8 turnovers in this 5-game sample size. So they have forced him to turn it over a lot. 3 turnovers in that last game when he lost. So I don't think he'll be elite. I do think they give him some problems here. And if he doesn't score multiple passing touchdowns, I think the ceiling is capped. So I do worry about him a little bit, but I think the floor will be fine. I think he'll be decent. You could start him. You could bench him. He's on the fringe here, kind of on the fence. You don't have to if you don't need to. Number 13, I have Bo Nix at Kansas City, who is shockingly the QB5 in points per game the last 4 games. It does involve a rushing touchdown as well as a receiving touchdown, but why I think it might be legit is because he does average 44 rushing yards per game. Bo Nix is very legit on the ground. So his athleticism is a very underrated aspect of his game. He only has 2 turnovers in that month as well. So with 7 total touchdowns, that does boost the ceiling quite a bit. 222 passing yards per game is not great, and I don't expect it to go up this week against Kansas City. So 20.3 points is not my projection at all. While I do think he's a decent pickup, I do think he's a good option on your bench rest of season. I think he has good value. I don't think he's a great start this week. At number 13, I think he will fall down back to earth. But I trust the floor. I do think the rushing yards will keep him viable. The Chiefs are a terrible matchup on the ground, however. So maybe I am a little too high here at number 13. I do think there's some legitimate risk in this matchup. But in fantasy, the matchup's actually average for opposing quarterbacks, so that's why I'm not downgrading him that much. I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback at all. Rest of season, that's not going to continue. I wouldn't trust it. But I do think he's a consistent number 2 option in a super flex format. I do think Bo Nix should be started every single week. His rushing yards keep him very viable. So I think he's a top 15 play this week. I could be wrong, but I trust the floor. I think Bo Nix has earned my trust. At 14, though, I have Aaron Rodgers at the Cardinals, and he has stepped up a little bit as the connection with his receivers has been elevated a little bit lately. I think you can trust him a bit more, but his ceiling is definitely capped. He offers nothing on the ground, and he's only the quarterback 17 in points per game the last 4. So that's dependent on touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, 3 turnovers in that span, but 254 passing yards per game is decent. So I think the floor is fine as long as he doesn't turn it over multiple times. I think he'll be okay. So at number 14, I think he's a fine start this week. I would expect at least 16, 17 points from Rodgers pretty safely. So he's a decent option. The matchup against the Cardinals doesn't scare you. And if Garrett Wilson continues to go off and dominate, then I think his ceiling is open. Rodgers is an interesting plug-in this week. At number 15, I have Drake Maye at the Chicago Bears, and the matchup is scary. It is the worst matchup on paper. They only give up 12 points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but only 3 interceptions in the last 5 weeks. It's oddly just a lack of yards against Chicago, why they're so tough as a matchup. So I don't panic too much, but on paper it's definitely a downgrade, and that's why I can't rank him where I really want to, because Drake Maye I think could be a league winner rest of season. He is a stud. In terms of running stats, he is great. 49 rushing yards per game is what he's offered in 4 games this season, and he didn't even play all of them. He left one of them with a concussion very early in that matchup. So he's been okay, although 6 total turnovers in that stretch. 7 total touchdowns is pretty good, and the 50 rushing yards per game definitely boosts the value tremendously. So he's the quarterback 15 in that sample size, and like I mentioned, one of those games wasn't even a full one, so he could be even better, and in good matchups I think he will have top 5 potential. But this week he definitely is a lower end option, just a floor play because of the rushing stats. That's the only reason I want to trust him. But the Bears could definitely shut him down. They play very well at home on defense, so this is risky. I think it's a different tier altogether, and at 15 I think I would rather pass. In most formats I don't think I'd be starting Drake Maye in week 10, but in a super flex league I think he's still viable. Those rushing yards are so valuable, and I think he does crack at least 15 points this week. I think Drake Maye is a decent start in 2 quarterback formats. But number 16 is where I rank Caleb Williams versus New England, who shockingly is actually a top 10 quarterback over his last 4 games. But 3 weeks ago, he had that bye. His last 2 games since the bye have been terrible, and recency bias is why it sounds so strange. But he played so elite before the bye. That's why these numbers look decent, but I don't actually trust him. Against the Patriots, it is a bottom 10 matchup as well. The offense looks disjointed. No one other than maybe Roma Dunze, I think, is actually like really engaged on a play-to-play basis. And I really have no faith in this offense anymore. It's kind of the last opportunity for them to win. So maybe they play well. I could envision it actually does happen. They could get out of this funk against a bad team like the Patriots. So maybe I'm too low, but he's really lost a lot of my faith, and I'm just not quite ready to trust him again. So while he will continue to hover inside the top 20, I don't think I'm ever going to rank him top 10 rest of the season. I think Caleb is too risky in fantasy. Number 17, I got CJ Stroud versus Detroit, who's been terrible in the last 4 games without Nico Collins. He's the quarterback 28 in points per game, averaging 11.9 on a per game basis. But you can easily just write that off and say, oh, it's because Nico Collins wasn't healthy. When Nico was on the field, CJ Stroud was much better. And that's actually somewhat true, but not really that much the case. He was the quarterback 19 in the previous 4 games. In points per game, only 15.9 on a per game basis. So it was reliant on yards, 288 per game, but only 5 touchdowns in that sample size. Their offense has never really gotten going this year to the level we expected when we drafted him. So Stroud is a big letdown this season. I don't fully trust him, and it's not like Stephon Diggs being unavailable makes you more confident. So Nico Collins probably isn't 100% healthy this week. Tank Dell also downgraded to questionable on Friday. Their receiving core is still very, very much banged up. So not quite ready to endorse Stroud. The matchup against Detroit is also bottom 6. They've caught 8 interceptions over the last 5 games. Although they give up a lot of yards, they only allow 13.9 points per game. In fantasy, 3 touchdowns, 8 picks the last 5 weeks. So Lions secondary, not that easy to go up against. I don't think Stroud is that dominant this week. And at number 17, I would recommend you bench him. I'd like to see it with Nico before I consider Stroud a must start once again. Number 18, I have Matthew Stafford versus Miami, who gets a terrible matchup. The Dolphins are so bad on the ground that they actually lock up opposing quarterbacks. In fantasy, they are the bottom 2 matchup, only allowing 12.7 points per game, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but only 188 passing yards per game. So that could definitely limit Stafford. If the game plan does pivot towards just Kyren Williams running it, then Stafford won't be very good. But I don't think they'll completely abandon the pass altogether in this matchup. I think Stafford will still be fine, but without multiple passing touchdowns, he's kind of a liability in general. You know, he gives you nothing on the ground, so if he turns it over and only throws 1 touchdown, then 300 yards might not be enough to go over 15 points. So not quite safe with Stafford. I think in a better matchup, I would trust him more, but this week, I don't think he's a must start. At number 18, I think I would pass on Stafford. Number 19, I think I'd also pass on Russell Wilson at Washington. The matchup is shockingly terrible. The Commanders rank bottom 3, only giving up 13 points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And 3 of those points come on the ground. 30 rushing yards per game is a big factor in that equation. So without it, you're actually getting not even 10 points per game, and they give up even fewer passing yards than the Dolphins do, 172 yards on average. So I do really worry about this matchup. They did just trade for Marshawn Lattimore, but he's not going to play in this game, so it's not as bad as it could be, but still I'd like to see it one more time with Russell Wilson. The sample size is just too small to fully trust. He is the quarterback 7 in 2 games this year with about 271 passing yards per game, 4 total touchdowns, 1 turnover. He has played very well in 2 games with the Steelers, but I'd like to see it one more time. I do not trust it, and in a bad matchup like this, I will not endorse it. Russell Wilson, a bench. In my opinion, I would sit him in week 10. Number 20, I have Joe Flacco versus Buffalo, who was not very good last week, and Michael Pittman not expected to play. I believe he's already been ruled out for Sunday's game against Buffalo. So not ideal. Flacco definitely loses some upside, and the Bills are technically a bottom 10 matchup. It could be tough. They have forced 5 fumbles in 9 games this season to opposing quarterbacks. So if he turns it over, that's not going to be good. I think that's kind of a fluky stat. I wouldn't expect it. But still, Flacco was bad last week, and he only has 1 good game this season against the Jags, who are a terrible, terrible defense. Definitely a good matchup for him to exploit. So not convinced I trust him. I think I was way too high on him last week. I apologize for that ranking. And against the Vikings defense, maybe that's the only reason why, but against Buffalo, I don't think it's that much better to fully ignore all the red flags here. So he's probably going to need a deep shot to Alec Pierce in order to really capitalize. I don't think Flacco is great. I think Taylor will be the reason why they're competitive, not so much Joe Flacco. So needs a better matchup. I'm going to pass. No thanks on Joe this week. Number 21 is where I rank Tua Tagovailoa at the Rams, and I could be too low. There's always some upside in this offense, especially if A-Chain continues to score in the passing game. But the Rams are a bottom 8 matchup. They have been kind of tough lately. 7 interceptions over the last 5 games does have me concerned for Tua, because in general, he has a very capped ceiling. He's averaging 14.1 points per game the last month, and that's kind of what he gave you last season in the months of November and December as well. So he's usually capped in terms of upside. He needs a lot of touchdowns to really pay off, and I don't think this is the game where it will happen. So not trusting him too much. I think he needs 300 plus yards and multiple touchdowns to go over even just like 16 points. So not expecting more than 14 here. I think Tua's a very risky play at number 21. I will bench him this week. I think he's not a safe play rest of season. Number 22, I have Kirk Cousins at New Orleans, who is kind of the cutoff point in terms of like a 14-point floor. I think in a super flex format, I'd consider it, but odds are I'd like to bench him this week because his only good stats are against Tampa. Otherwise, he's not a safe quarterback at all. And even the last 4 games, which includes 1 game against Tampa, he's only the quarterback 18 in points per game. 16.5 points is nothing special. So I really don't trust him. He was terrible against the Saints in fantasy in week 4. He had no touchdowns, 1 interception, and did not go over 10 points in that matchup. I've also looked into it. Drake London never scores touchdowns in this matchup. He's banged up. Maybe with no Lattimore, it changes, but Kyle Pitts is also terrible in this matchup. I think given the Saints are so bad on the ground, I do think this is a better game for Algier and Bijan rather than Cousins. So I think he's a big liability this week. I think he is a benchable quarterback. At number 22, I could not really think of a reason to endorse him other than the fact that they just traded away Lattimore and fired their head coach, and maybe the defense and the Saints in general just quit this week. It's possible that happens, but a lot of time after they fire the coach, the team gets galvanized and the defense does step up. So I really don't trust Cousins this week. I have no idea what to expect. And a lot of the success for opposing fantasy quarterbacks in this matchup rely on 37 rushing yards per game allowed by New Orleans. So you know that doesn't apply to Kirk Cousins. So I don't trust him. I think his ceiling is very low this week. He'll need more than 1 touchdown. I don't think it happens against the Saints. They've also caught 11 interceptions on the season. I worry about Cousins this week. At number 23, I kind of want to rank Daniel Jones higher because he gets the Panthers here and it is a top 5 matchup. But in Munich, I really have no idea what to expect from that game. It's possible Daniel Jones goes off. It's also possible that he gets benched and we never see him start a game for the Giants ever again. They have a bye after this, and sometimes coaches lose their job overseas. I could see the quarterback lose his job if he sucks. So I can't trust Daniel Jones. But the Panthers' defense sucks as well. They've allowed 9 passing touchdowns, not a single interception the last 5 games. And maybe Malik Neighbors does go off. We know that Daniel Jones offers some rushing upside as well. So if he does give you like 40 rushing yards this week, then you might be okay. But it's just not safe enough for me to endorse. I'm going to pass on Daniel Jones. But the opponent in this game also has some upside. The Giants are a very good matchup, top 6 against opposing quarterbacks. It's just wasted on Bryce Young. No one actually trusts Bryce Young in their lineup. They give up 38 rushing yards per game, though, not a single interception the last 5 games. So maybe, just maybe, he does pay off, but he's going to need those rushing stats to hit. So I don't trust him. I'm going to ignore Bryce Young, even in a good matchup. No, thank you. I will pass on the Germany game in fantasy this week. Number 25, I have Derek Carr versus Atlanta, who also gets a top 7 matchup here. The Falcons can't really stop anyone in fantasy, so you would expect to upgrade him, but his offense is just so depleted. Given Cedric Wilson is his number 1 receiver this week, I will pass. I'm not going to trust Carr at all. Number 26 is the fuck no territory. I'm definitely benching Cooper Rush versus the Eagles. And although he has some weapons, maybe there's some upside. Philly has actually been the worst matchup overall since their bye week. The last 4 games, they only allow 8 points per game to opposing quarterbacks, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, 127 yards per game. So Cooper Rush is going to suck this week. I have no confidence. I do not trust the Cowboys in this matchup. Number 27, Will Levis at the Chargers. You know, he's going to turn it over like crazy, and the Chargers have a very good defense this year. If that Nick Westbrook-Akine touchdown dries up, then Ridley will not save him. So no thanks with Will Levis. I'm definitely benching him. And lastly, Mac Jones is my lowest ranked quarterback this week versus the Vikings. I have no confidence in Mac Jones. Maybe if it was Lawrence, I'd consider it, but against Brian Flores' defense, no thank you at all. They've caught 13 interceptions in 8 games this season, so maybe there's some garbage time for Brian Thomas Jr., but Mac Jones should be ass. Let's move on to tight end, where thankfully there's no injuries anymore. The only tight end that's been ruled out this week would be Isaiah Likely, who is out. So we get Dallas Goedert back. He's fully healthy. And the only other players unranked would be on bye. Brock Bowers on bye. So is Tucker Kraft, David Njoku, and Noah Fant. There's actually like 4 legit tight ends you can't start this week. So the position dries up very quickly. Outside the top 10, it does get pretty gross. Odds are you already know who you're starting. But let's get to these rankings. At number 1, it's pretty obvious. George Kittle is clearly the tight end 1 this season. He has been so dominant. He's averaging 17.7 points per game in his last 4 with 4 touchdowns, 86 yards per game. No one is ever benching George Kittle. This matchup is also the best on paper in the last 5 games. They are number 1, allowing 18.2 points per game, 95 yards per game to the position. George Kittle will dominate. Number 2, in the same game, I have Cade Otton versus San Francisco, who's lights out in this offense. With no Chris Godwin, his role is not going to change at all. But Mike Evans is not back yet, so he remains the number 1 target, and he's been seeing 9.3 per game the last month. Cade Otton is on fire with 4 touchdowns. He's a lock in your lineup. 16.2 points per game is the tight end 2, just barely behind George Kittle. So Cade Otton, a must start, definitely a lock in your lineup. A league winner, potentially, rest of season. Number 3, I have Travis Kelce versus Denver, who's been really good the last 4 games, averaging 13.1 points per game on 10.8 targets. He's clearly back as the top guy in this offense. So you trust him for sure. I have no concerns with Kelce. He's not played great in this matchup, only 6 touchdowns in 19 career games versus Denver. He might not score a touchdown in this matchup, but I definitely trust the volume for him. He's the tight end 3 the last month, and he's a pretty safe bet to give you 60 plus yards. He's no longer the tight end 1, but I still think he's top 5 the rest of the season. Number 4 is where I have Trey McBride versus the Jets, who's probably the most bust-proof option this season, but touchdowns have been rare for him. He has still technically not caught a touchdown. He did find the end zone last week. It was a rushing touchdown, and then his only other touchdown this season was when he fell on a fumble from somebody else. So I have yet to see him actually score a touchdown. I'd love to see that. If it happens, I will trust him a little bit more. But until it does, I just can't rank him above Travis Kelce. He's still a lock in your lineup, definitely a top 5 tight end. No matter what, the volume is very safe, and he offers 77 yards per game the last month. McBride is bust-proof, 12.3 points per game is what you should expect from him. Number 5, I got Mike Gesicki at Baltimore, followed by Mark Andrews at number 6. I did rank them this way entering Thursday night, and I think the process was correct. Although Likely was out and maybe Andrews was a safer bet, his volume had been so limited this year, I trusted more targets for Gesicki, who did get 9 targets in this game, but he only caught 4 of them. Tanner Hudson caught the touchdown, and Gesicki was very frustrating to watch last night. It was very annoying. Their defense kind of focused on him. I think if they wanted to take one player out of the game, it was Gesicki last night. I think they just let Chase have what he wanted. They stopped Mike Gesicki, and it did work out. The Ravens did win the game, but it was close, and I was wrong. Gesicki was averaging 12.8 points per game in 4 games without Higgins entering last night. Andrews was averaging 12 points per game the last 4, and it was very dependent on touchdowns. I thought Gesicki would be safer. Obviously, Andrews does score that touchdown and has a far better game. So I was wrong here. I should have ranked Andrews at number 5, but I think the process on starting Gesicki was correct. I think he was a top 10 play this week based on the process of deciding how safe he was. So I was just wrong. He did not find the end zone, and 5 of those targets did not hit. Gesicki was a letdown, and I wish I bet on Andrews instead of Gesicki. That was the one bet on Thursday that did not hit. I almost made $215 if not for Gesicki letting me down. So apologies if you started Gesicki over Andrews based on my rankings, but honestly, I don't think Gesicki should have been ranked any lower than tight end 7, given how good he has been without T. Higgins entering last night. Number 7 is where I have Taysom Hill versus Atlanta, and obviously he's dependent on rushing stats, and this matchup against Atlanta is decent. They give up 119 rushing yards per game on 5.3 yards per carry, but only 1 rushing touchdown allowed. I do think he will be held out of the end zone. But given this offense is so depleted, I think beyond Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill is their next best weapon. So I trust the floor. He did score a touchdown last week, and it might repeat. I think he's probably the safest bet to actually score a touchdown in this offense in this game. So I would still keep starting him. He does average 8.4 points per game the last 4, but given all of the recent injuries, I think projecting him based on his stats this year are kind of a hard thing to do. I expect 8 rush attempts for Taysom and maybe some targets on top of that. So he's a decent play. I think given the state of their offense with all the injuries, I would trust him. I think he's a top 10 play this week. There's definitely high upside with Taysom Hill. At number 8, I think the floor is very high with Hunter Henry. At Chicago, I do trust him a lot. He's actually averaging 10.2 points per game in his last 4. With only 1 touchdown, he's the tight end 9 with 59 yards per game. I really trust him a lot. So the volume is legit with Drake Maye. He's clearly their number 1 target, and the upside is decent. I do think there's a 13-point ceiling for Henry. If he does score a touchdown, you'll be very happy you started him. But even if he doesn't, I think he's a very legit floor play. I think 8 points is probably guaranteed from Hunter Henry this week. The volume should be there for about 7 targets in this game. So love that for him. The Bears defense also gives up 67 yards per game to the position. I think Henry is legit this week. He's a top 10 play, in my opinion. Number 9, I think Dalton Kincaid is a decent start this week. At the Colts, the matchup is top 6. They've given up 3 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 games, along with 61 yards per game. That's 13 points per game on average. So good opportunity for Kincaid, especially with Keon Coleman already ruled out and Amari Cooper not 100%, might miss his second game in a row. I think Kincaid should step up. The volume has been good for him the last 4 weeks. An average of 7.5 targets is even more than Hunter Henry, but less than 5 catches per game, 42 yards. He has not quite capitalized on that volume, only 7.8 points per game in his last 4. So that is not elite. It's only good for like tight end 13, and I could see him not pay off once again. But odds are the floor is high, the volume is consistent, so I will trust him. I think he's a fine floor play this week. I think in a similar vein to Hunter Henry, I trust him not to bust in this matchup, but he's not lived up to the potential. We thought he'd be elite entering the year. That is not the case at all. Number 10, I got Sam LaPorta at Houston, who's definitely not the tight end 1 this season. He's definitely not lived up to expectation at all either. But the volume is the only reason why. He has 2 touchdowns the last 4 games, but only 3 targets, 2.5 catches, 38 yards per game. He is not safe at all. So I'm not dying to start him. I think the volume is scary. This matchup's also terrible in terms of points per game allowed. They rank bottom 2, only 6.1 points per game, thanks to 2 touchdowns, but only 24 yards to tight ends this season. So not a good spot. I worry about the production because with Jameson Williams coming back, the volume probably doesn't go up very much. So that's been a problem for this offense. You can also complain about Amon-Ra St. Brown's volume as well. And I think LaPorta is very touchdown dependent this week. Without it, he will not pay off. So good luck if you're starting LaPorta. Maybe this game turns into a shootout and he really turns up, but I have a hard time trusting him seeing more than 3 targets. That rarely happens. So I don't think he's safe, but at number 10, I do think he's worth a start this week. At number 11, I have TJ Hockenson at Jacksonville, and I know I'm kind of just assuming the best, but last week they got Josh Oliver the touchdown. I think it will pivot to Hockenson this week because the matchup's very good against Jacksonville, and you know they're going to win this game comfortably. So I think they can use it as an opportunity to get him going. I think there's a lot of momentum that will be built for Hockenson in this matchup. Last week they were just testing it out. Now that he's firmly on the field, I do expect him to play well. The Jags give up 14.9 points per game to opposing tight ends. In their last 5, that is a top 5 matchup overall, and it's not like it's only touchdown dependent. While yes, they've allowed 4 touchdowns, 71 yards per game on 6 catches is really nice. So I think Hockenson will get more involved this week. I see more targets for him, and the touchdown has a legit shot to hit. So I think he's a good bye-week fill-in, honestly. I think at number 11, I think Hockenson will be a decent start this week. You could do a lot worse, but he's still just a streaming option. Until we see him play well, I don't think I can rank him top 10. At number 12, I have Dallas Goedert at Dallas, who should be returning back to the field this week. He is off the injury report, and that means he will play. So that's why I trust him. I think the floor should be fine. In his last 5 games against Dallas, he does not have a touchdown, though, in that stretch. 47 yards, keeps the floor high for 7.1 points per game on about 3 catches most of the time. So he'll be okay, but all of his production this season has really come with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith missing time. I don't think he's actually the elite option that he was playing like before the bye week and before his injury. So not quite ready to trust Goedert yet. I think it's definitely coming back down to earth. What we expected entering the year is what I expect from him this week. At number 13, I have Kyle Pitts at New Orleans, and you're probably thinking, why are you ranking him so low? He's been a top 10 play this season and definitely has earned more respect this year. But I hate this matchup for him. He put up a bagel in week 4 against the Saints. He was terrible, and that is quite close to his track record so far in his career. He has never played well against the Saints. He's never scored a touchdown in 6 career games versus New Orleans, and in his last 5, he has no more than 2 catches in a single game for a maximum 27 yards. In that stretch, he's been absolutely dog shit overall. So I kind of feel like I'm ranking him too high, honestly. I think overall, I have no desire to trust Kyle Pitts this week. He is an absolute bench, in my opinion. I am buying into the matchup stats for Kyle Pitts versus New Orleans. He is absolute garbage. So I think number 13 is just considering what he's done this year. He's actually the tight end 8 in points per game the last 4 weeks, 10.8 points per game with 2 touchdowns, 59 yards per game. But last week was terrible. Drake London got hurt early in the first quarter, and Kyle Pitts still played like shit. So I don't trust him at all. There's going to be games where he plays well, and this is one where I think he plays like shit. I think Kyle Pitts is a liability this week. I have no desire to start him whatsoever. At 13, I think you should bench him. Number 14 is Cole Kmet versus New England, who's also a major liability. Also has 2 touchdowns the last 4 games, but only 7.7 points per game on average. The volume is kind of non-existent. He had a bagel last week, did nothing the week before, and I don't understand why they've moved away from him since the bye. I would have expected them to send him more volume because he played so well before the bye week. So all of his production came before their bye, and there are some games where he goes balls to the wall, goes ballistic, and scores multiple touchdowns. So that's always possible for Kmet. His ceiling is definitely one of the highest overall at the position, but I just don't trust him. There's a lot of burn potential, and just like Kyle Pitts, I think a bagel this week is not outside the realm of possibility. So not going to rank him any higher than 14. While you could get that touchdown, you could also get less than 2 points. Jonnu Smith comes in at number 15 at the Rams, who's also been really good the last 4 games. The tight end 11 in points per game, an average of 9.7 points, 56 yards per game, and only 1 touchdown. Volume is the reason why he's been good. The Mike McDaniel offense is finally getting the tight end involved at this point. Jonnu is a big part of their receiving core. So I do think he's a safe floor play. I do think I could be ranking him too low. His matchup's also top 8. The Rams give up 12.2 points per game to the position, 60 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns to tight ends the last 5 games. Jonnu could play very well on Monday night, but the production is kind of shocking, honestly. I don't actually believe he's like a safe play all season long. It could definitely pivot away from him at any point in time. So I am impressed, but I'm not quite ready to endorse him at tight end 15. I think this is the highest I can go. And there's also 4 tight ends on bye that I could legitimately rank above him. So it's kind of just getting lucky this week. At number 15, I don't actually think he's a good start. I would rather pass on Jonnu, but he has been very safe the last month. 9.7 points is pretty good for a tight end. Number 16 is where I rank Evan Engram versus Minnesota this week. And although Christian Kirk is out, you'd expect more volume for him. With no Trevor Lawrence, I have no confidence that Mac Jones actually gets him the ball at a high rate. So the previous stats for Engram, I think I can throw them out entirely. While he is averaging 10 points per game, I just have no confidence with Mac Jones under center. So I'm going to pass. The matchup's also bottom 5. I don't think he finds the end zone. I do not think Engram is a safe play this week, but I understand if you think I'm too low. At number 17, I also think Jake Ferguson is worth a bench this week. Terrible matchup. And Cooper Rush does not give me much confidence. Without Dak Prescott, I don't think I trust Ferguson the same. He has no touchdowns on the season, and I don't think that's going to change here. I think Ferguson is worth a benching. The Eagles have been very tough, not giving up a single touchdown to tight ends over the last 5 weeks. So not expecting much from him. I think 7 points would be lucky. But I will say this, he has played very well last season against Philly. He did own this matchup, averaged 14.2 points per game in those 2 games, but obviously that was with Dak at quarterback, and I'm not convinced it repeats, but 9 targets per game, 6 catches, 82 yards per game with 1 touchdown was phenomenal. Ferguson was lights out last year against the Eagles, so perhaps it happens again, but with Cooper Rush under center, I'd rather pass. I just don't feel safe enough to expect it to happen again. At number 18, I have Zach Ertz versus Pittsburgh, and he very rarely scores touchdowns, but he's usually a very safe floor play. He is the tight end 16 in points per game the last month, averaging 8.3. You could do far worse than Zach Ertz. Number 19, I have Jatavian Sanders versus the Giants, who is stepping up his game lately. He does not have a touchdown, but he is averaging 7.1 points per game. That's tied with Ferguson on 4.8 targets, 4 catches, 51 yards per game. It looks like he's the number 1 target for Bryce Young in this offense. Although that is not saying very much. Given he's a tight end, the bar is much lower, so he has actually been worth starting the last several weeks. But I don't trust him at all. This matchup's also the worst on paper. They have yet to give up a touchdown to tight ends this year. So without that touchdown, I don't trust him, but he has played somewhat well. I think he has an interesting floor, not that much different than guys like Zach Ertz, Jake Ferguson, and Evan Engram this week. But another interesting floor play in the same game would be Theo Johnson, who gets an elite matchup. The Panthers ranked top 3, giving up 80 yards per game to the position and 5 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. That's an average of 15.6 points per game to the position. But obviously, National Tight Ends Day was a factor there, and some of these high-end stats that I've mentioned are a little bit skewed overall at the position. It's hard to expect that much production from tight end. But 80 yards and 5 touchdowns is legit, definitely a reason to upgrade any tight end in this matchup. And Theo Johnson has actually been somewhat involved, averaging 5.5 points per game, is tight end 25 over the last month. So I do rank him top 20. He does crack the top 20, but definitely not starting him. Definitely worth passing on this week, but there is upside given the matchup. These last 5, I think you're definitely benching, and I have no confidence in Pat Freiermuth at the moment. He's been just as bad as Tyler Conklin, who I rank right behind him at number 22. Both of them are averaging 5.2 points per game. That ranks as tight end 28 over the last month. So you need a touchdown from both of them. Maybe Freiermuth does get a good matchup here, and it is possible, but with Mike Evans coming into the mix, I think that will limit his red zone looks. I don't trust Freiermuth at the moment. And Conklin is also touchdown dependent as well. He's only giving you 12 yards per game the last month, but with 2 touchdowns, that is the only saving grace. So no thanks with either, touchdown dependent for sure. And at 23, I think I'm going to pass on Juwan Johnson versus Atlanta, but he might get involved given all the injuries in the Saints offense. But I'm going to pass, no thank you, with Juwan Johnson. No thanks with Will Dissly. You have to be very desperate to pick him up, but he has stepped up with all the injuries in the Chargers receiving core. As they get healthier, I lose confidence in Dissly. Last player ranked, though, would be Dalton Schultz versus Detroit, and he has done nothing stepping up with no Nico Collins. So with Collins coming back, I don't think it'll get any better. I know Diggs is still out, but I have no faith in Schultz. He's been bad this season. Let's move on to defense, though, and wrap up this video. The Chargers are by far and away my number 1 start this week. They are one of the 2 safest picks to win against the Titans, and you know Will Levis will turn it over like crazy. The ceiling is wide open for the Chargers this week, and the floor is pretty much always top 10. This year, they've been a very good fantasy defense to start. At number 2, I'm starting the Vikings at Jacksonville for sure this week. It's the other top 2 lock to win. Minnesota is guaranteed to win this game, especially against Mac Jones. They will dominate, but it's possible that Brian Thomas Jr. does torch their secondary in garbage time. That's the tiebreaker why I prefer the Chargers this week. At number 3, I have the Bears versus New England, who play far better at home than on the road. And this is their last good chance to actually win. Rest of season, I could see them never winning a game after this matchup. So start them while you can against Drake Maye, a rookie quarterback who should be making several mistakes. I do trust their upside. I think the Bears do win, and their defense is a major reason why at home I trust them a lot more than on the road. Number 4, I have the Eagles at Dallas, and Cooper Rush at quarterback with Lamb not fully healthy. The Eagles defense has been lights out since the bye. In their last 4 games, they've been very good, and I think it continues against Dallas this week. The backup quarterback definitely gives you confidence. At number 5, I have the Chiefs versus Denver, and they lost to the Broncos last time for the first time in over 8 years last season, and the Broncos offense might look just as inept as it did last week against Baltimore. So I definitely trust the Chiefs. They are probably the 3rd top lock to win this week, and their defense is one of the best this season. I think they will offer a top 5 floor this week against Denver. Definitely trusting them against Bo Nix. At number 6, I have the Steelers at Washington, and Jayden Daniels is a tricky matchup, but off the bye, the Steelers are still one of the best plays in the NFL. In fantasy, their defense will be top 10 every week. Number 7, I have the Broncos at Kansas City, and the Chiefs offense has not been elite this season. The game probably stays kind of ugly and probably stays within a touchdown, at least 10 points. That's my opinion. But Denver has forced 8 turnovers on Mahomes in the last 4 games, so they should be fine in terms of floor. I think they're still worth a start against Kansas City. Number 8, I think, is a completely different tier, honestly. I think we are past the safe options. I think with all the teams on bye and some terrible matchups overall, I really think defense is an ugly position this week. And if you don't have a top 7 option, you are kind of desperate and really clamoring on the waiver wire for some help. So I'm not excited to start the Falcons, but I do think they have some upside here. The Saints offense is just so injured, I don't consider them a threat. But you never know what Alvin Kamara will do. There might be some pushback on offense. In a division rivalry game, it's probably low scoring, so I do think the Falcons are a safe top 10 play, but not my favorite. I do worry I could be very wrong about them this week. Number 9, I have the Commanders versus Pittsburgh, and I expect a low-scoring game here, and the Commanders have also played very well on defense lately. I do trust them a lot more than I did entering the season. They did trade for Marshawn Lattimore as well, but he has been ruled out. He's not going to play in this first game. I think they're saving him for Thursday against the Eagles. In division, that game matters a lot more. But the Steelers' defense doesn't scare you that much, and their defense should step up. I think the Commanders are still a top 10 option against Pittsburgh this week. Number 10, I have the Panthers versus the Giants, followed by the Giants at Carolina. In the Munich game, I could see a very low score. Neither offense is good, but there's also some odds that both defenses are just so trash that it turns into a shootout. The odds of that happening are slim, but it is possible. There is some risk with both of these defenses. So that could be a problem. I could be wrong here, but I think given the matchups are so good, neither offense actually scares you. I think the defenses do rank top 12 this week. I think they're interesting plugins if you are looking to the waiver wire this week. At number 12, kind of the last defense I'd consider starting, honestly, the Patriots at Chicago get a decent matchup. The Bears offense does not scare you at all. They're so disjointed. I have no concerns that they drop 30 points, honestly. So I think New England still puts up a fight. I think they are top 12. I think the floor is fine for the Pats this week. At number 13, they're very interesting, but the Dolphins offense does scare me a bit. The Rams are interesting on Monday night. Their pass rush deserves more credit. They're really good on defense, honestly, better than most people expected. And their secondary has looked okay as well. But against the Dolphins, it could turn into a shootout. I do see some risk here. The Rams are not as safe, but probably hold Miami to less than 24. Number 14 and 15, I have the Jets and Cardinals back-to-back in the same game. And this is going to be a very tight, very strange matchup. Jets at Arizona does scare me, could turn into a shootout. Definitely. So that's why there's some risk here. The Jets' talent should keep them viable from a floor standpoint, but I don't actually trust them. And I do worry that Kyler really gets back on track and torches them in the run game. It could be ugly. So I'd rather pass on both teams, but I think it will be very close. And the Cardinals defense has played well lately. So I think Cardinals are right behind the Jets this week. Going to be a close game, and turnovers might decide it. Cardinals at 15, not the worst option, but like I mentioned, outside the top 10, I'd rather just bench all of these defenses altogether. At 16, I have the Niners at Tampa Bay, and I think San Francisco lights up the scoreboard on the Bucs here, and once they're up by so much, the Bucs will probably put up a lot of points in garbage time themselves, so could surrender a meaningless 28 points, and in fantasy, that is not good. I think their ceiling is capped because of the catch-up mode that will be given and allowed to Tampa in this matchup. So Brandon Staley's defense, they're talented, but I don't trust them. At number 16, I will pass in a tough matchup against Baker. Number 17, I'm definitely benching the Titans at the Chargers. Chargers might not be elite on offense, but good enough to limit the Tennessee upside. The Chargers rarely turn it over, so no upside here. I think you need to be very lucky to get more than one takeaway by the Titans. At number 18, I'm benching the Bills. I think the Colts do put up a good fight, but they will win the game. The Bills are not as safe this week. I could see Jonathan Taylor running all over them. Number 19, I have the Saints versus Atlanta, and in division, they will put up a fight, but it won't be enough. The team might honestly quit given the state of the franchise at the moment. Number 20, I have the Dolphins at the Rams, and their run defense is terrible, but the Rams in primetime probably drop 30, so nope, Not gonna trust the Dolphins at all. Definitely benching the Lions at Houston. High shootout potential, no thank you. 22, I had the Ravens. I was right about the shootout. They gave up 34. Number 23, the Colts versus Buffalo. Bills could easily drop 30, so no thanks here. Number 24, the Cowboys versus Philly. Eagles offense is a nightmare, so hell no with the Cowboys. Number 25, Texans versus Detroit. In primetime, the Lions are gonna dominate. Hell no. You are asking to lose. And then these last three are the fuck no territory as well. Bengals at Baltimore. I told you to bench him. Ravens scored 35. Jags versus Minnesota. Jags are garbage. And then Bucks versus the Niners. I think the Niners might drop 40. I think it's a get-right game with Christian McCaffrey back. I have no desire to test San Francisco. They could legitimately finish 12-5 or 13-4, and right now they're 4-4. They might win out rest of season. So that's it for this video. That's it for all my rankings. And here are the top 20 on the screen. I think depth at all three positions is actually very tricky this week, given all the buys and matchups. It does not feel very safe at quarterback beyond the top 9. I think even Jayden Daniels and Kyler Murray, kind of tricky, but I do trust Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, and Baker Mayfield a lot this week. I think even Sam Darnold in an elite matchup offers a high floor. I think all the way through Justin Herbert, you should expect 18 points, and those would be the safe starts this week. But starting with Mahomes, I think it's just like super flex territory, and you're hoping for like 16. I think once you hit CJ Stroud, that is the last guy I think has a safe floor for that much. Matthew Stafford through Kirk Cousins, I think will barely get you more than 14 points, and quarterback does get pretty gross outside the top 10. So good luck to you. If you are streaming the position, maybe Bo Nix, Justin Herbert, and Drake Maye are the players to look to. At tight end, I think beyond Hunter Henry, the floor is hard to bet on. You're really hoping for a touchdown. And honestly, beyond Dallas Goedert, I think you should be benching all of those tight ends. I have no excitement for Kyle Pitts and any tight end ranked behind him this week. There is very risky options overall at that position. But the top 8 all the way through Hunter Henry should offer at least 8 points. I think the floor and ceiling is tremendous with those top 8 guys. But you need that touchdown. It gets pretty gross outside Dalton Kincaid. Good luck at tight end. Lastly, at defense, I mentioned is also very ugly. I think the top 7 are very good, but starting with the Falcons through the Jets and Cardinals, it is very, very risky. You're hoping for like 6 points as a floor. If that's what I got at defense this week, I'd be happy. I'd take it. I think there is a lot of risk for less than 3 points at defense this week. So good luck to you. It's going to be an interesting week in fantasy, and there's a lot of buys coming up as well. So buckle up and lock in. We're hitting the final stretch. Let's make that playoff push together. And that's going to be it for this video. If you have not yet done so, hit that like button and subscribe. If you made it to the end, what are you waiting for? Join this channel and subscribe. The button is right there. Tomorrow's Saturday, so I'm going to update all of my rankings. Look out for that. Ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss out. And I will see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.